Hello and welcome to another Leica review. Today I want to talk about the older lenses, the used lenses mostly. And these lenses that were produced back in the 1960s, 70s, even 80s are around today. And these lenses are well built, and that is the reason they are still available and serve a very useful function. And I often get asked about whether they should be bought and used instead of buying newer lenses. And I always answer the same way. I say, if you are going to buy lenses that are used, ensure that those lenses are in good condition. And if you do, you will probably get a look that is very different than the modern look. See, a lot of people don't realize that the modern day lenses are designed for digital cameras. And digital cameras are very accurate. They capture a lot of detail. And in fact, the more number of pixels that we are having in cameras is causing the lenses to resolve more. And what has ended up being is these lenses showing a lot of detail, but sacrificing a lot of the character that they had from the past. You see, a lot of people think that when they purchase a lens, that the more expensive it is, the more elements it has, the better it will be. And that is a mistake because a lot of people still don't see the fact that modern lenses are very clinical. And to overcome that, some compromises have to be made. And those compromises, for example, edge to edge sharpness, is something that everybody talks about, but is it really desirable? Having sharpness at the corners, if you're doing a portrait, for example, is not the ideal way to use a lens. So if you had, for example, 135mm f2.8, that is a portrait lens that you would want to use if you are photographing somebody, and it will give you that beautiful bokeh. But if you had a modern lens, and that's what I'm talking about, is the 135mm f3.4 is a slower lens, but it has more resolving power and has edge to edge sharpness, yet it is slower. So it takes away from the ability of being able to render an image that is more characterful or more contrasty. See, I see a lens as a tool. It's a way that you can draw. It's like a painter taking a brush and painting a picture, a painting that speaks. And you may have different tools in your arsenal, but because a brush is an old brush does not mean that it does not perform as well. And when you take a lens and make it more accurate, it sometimes gives you that clinical look. And that is what we should be avoiding and going for a look that we should feel very comfortable with. And sometimes people think that older lenses with lesser elements is something that is to be avoided. What I tell you is the less elements, the less the light gets processed and the more natural it usually looks. Because the more corrective layers means that you are putting a lens into a process of processing the light time and time and time again. In the end, you have a very accurate photograph or an image, but that image has been so processed that it becomes flattened. It loses some of the micro contrast. It is for that very reason when you purchase a lens, ensure that those elements are not that many. Those elements are there and serve a purpose only to give you the look that you need. You see, when we put a lens element, we are changing the angle of view. Whether using a 135mm or a 75mm, you are changing the angle of view. But if you could change the angle of view with less elements and remove some of that chromatic aberration, maybe perhaps some of that vignetting, and attain a very high quality image with a lot of micro contrast and saturation, then you have achieved your aim. And if you think about it, lenses have been produced for years and years and years, And that know-how keeps growing more and more. So they don't need to reinvent 135 millimeter. They had it 40 years ago. And what has happened is today we're thinking that buying a more expensive lens and paying $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, or $10,000 for it is actually going to improve the images that we are going to get from our camera. In fact, it is the opposite oftentimes, because what we are doing is the sharper we are trying to attain from an image, we are sacrificing some of that quality. And I have mentioned in my previous videos as well, all the lenses were ground by hand. So each lens element, each aspect of that lens element gave you a look. And that look was a particular look for that particular lens. What that meant was that if you bought that lens, it would only be that specific lens, even though the other lenses were manufactured or built in the same manner, but the lens elements differed by these small fractions that gave them a different look. David Lean, for example, he would order lenses, 10 or 12 at a time, and then select one, even though they came from the same manufacturer. So what that should tell you is that the character of the lens is what makes it special. Speaking of David Lean, you should also know that if you look at the works of Stanley Kubrick, he repeated that process as well. He looked at lenses, he tested them, he ordered 10 or 12, and he also eliminated the ones that he didn't want. Of course, if you have watched some of his films, they have been using Leica lenses, and one of the reasons we are getting that look is because of that. It is that character that cannot be duplicated with some of the modern lenses. That is why when we watch films like Hateful Eight, you're seeing this beautiful character. Those lenses that are used are from 1960s, in fact 1965. And the reason they are being used on a digital sensor is to attain that beautiful natural look that the film usually had. And it is for this reason that we are going to have to look for ways of getting character out of a lens, getting that 3D pop, rather than getting more accurate, sharper photographs. See, if you have a very flat image that is very sharp, it is not as impactful if you have, for example, a little 3D pop with a lot of micro contrast. Micro contrast and 3D pop, whether you're using a higher f-stop or lower f-stop, makes big difference. And it's that big difference that we want to attain. If you are even taking a photograph of a landscape with your aperture, for example, at 5.6 or f8, you don't want to have a flat image. You want to actually see the separation between objects that are in focus in your frame, yet they are separated by that 3D pop. And that can only be attained by the micro contrast. And micro contrast is what Leica lenses excel at. This is the reason we look for those natural skin tones. We look for that 3D pop. And this is the reason I like using Leica lenses. Yet again, I'm not shying away from using a lens that was built in 1970s and 80s because it has a beautiful character. And it is for that very reason Leica had continued to build lenses they have had in their arsenal for almost decades. And this is the reason you should be looking into lenses that have a lot of character. Now, I have listed some of these lenses that I really like and I feel are really good value in the description section below. And I've also written an article which you can find on our website. It is newly redesigned, theleicareview.com. And if you do visit, please do sign up to our newsletter where you can get updates on news articles that we are publishing, also on some deals that we have found online that you may also benefit. And I think that if you follow our channel, you'll find information that is both informative and also entertaining. And I thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.